In a world where betrayal and manipulation run deep, one woman's quiet strength and meticulous planning lead to a moment of reckoning for those who thought they could break her. Claire Davis, once the outsider in a family that never accepted her, faces humiliation at her sister-in-law's wedding. But little do they know, she's already set the stage for their downfall. Watch as Claire rises from the ashes, turning the tables on those who thought they had all the power. Don't forget to subscribe to start the story today. I can still feel the weight of that name tag in my hand. The cheap plastic digging into my palm, as though it were burning into my skin. The words, "Housekeeper," stared up at me, bold and mocking. It wasn't just a mistake, it was deliberate. An insult dressed as a careless error. My name was Claire Davis. Not just some servant in their world. But it felt like they'd reduced me to nothing more than that. I had been prepared for the slight. Even expected it. But nothing could truly prepare me for the humiliation of that moment. The ballroom was filled with laughter. The kind that stung. The kind that made it clear I was the subject of some cruel joke. The eyes of everyone around me flicked between the name tag and my face. Some filled with pity, others hidden beneath their smirks. There I was, standing in the middle of a sea of well-dressed people, surrounded by smiles that weren't meant for me. My seat empty. The plate they had promised me nowhere in sight. It was as though my very existence had been erased from the night. As though I didn't belong. It should have been the happiest day for my husband, Mark, but he was across the room, engaged in a conversation with Michael, the groom, completely unaware of the spectacle unfolding right before his eyes. And that, more than anything, stung. My mother-in-law, Margaret, was sipping her wine, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. She was pleased, I could tell. And then there was Emily, my spiteful sister-in-law. She beamed, expecting my quiet humiliation, basking in her petty triumph. They thought they had broken me. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea what I had been preparing for. What I had been plotting in silence for months. I stared down at that name tag and something inside me shifted. It wasn't a moment of defeat, as they'd hoped. It was the moment I decided I would no longer play their game. I wasn't going to sit here and let them tear me apart for their amusement. No, I would do something far more dangerous. I would let them think they had won. Let them think that I was just a simple housekeeper. Let them think that I was nothing but an outsider. But while they smirked, I quietly set in motion something that would shatter their world. This wasn't just about the name tag, or the mockery in the air. This was years of pain, of passive-aggressive comments, of being excluded from the very family I married into. I had been tolerated but never accepted, made to feel less than. Margaret had made it clear from the beginning that I was not worthy of the Harris name. I was just a nurse from a middle-class background, not someone who belonged in their circle of wealth and status. Emily, my sister-in-law, didn't like me for even more petty reasons. I had stolen her brother's attention, and I hadn't fawned over her material wealth the way she had hoped. No, I had been an outsider in my own marriage from the start. I had tried to play the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law at first. I had brushed off their cruel jokes, their cold glances, and the whispered insults that followed me at family gatherings. I thought if I held on long enough, they would change. They would finally see me for who I was. But that didn't happen. Instead, I found myself alone in a marriage with a man who didn't see the depth of my suffering. But tonight, that all changed. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. I wasn't going to stay silent. I had spent months quietly gathering evidence, watching, waiting for the right moment. When I first started noticing the strange withdrawals from our joint account, I thought I had to be mistaken. But then the amounts kept growing. The accounts unfamiliar, and Robert, my husband, brushed it all off as just a temporary thing. He said it was for wedding planning. But I knew better. So, while he stayed oblivious, I began to protect myself. I opened a separate account, rerouted my direct deposits, and started setting aside enough money to ensure that, if the worst happened, I wouldn't be left with nothing. But that was just the beginning. I dug deeper. Margaret wasn't just using Robert's money for wedding expenses, she was stealing it. I hired a financial investigator, and what he uncovered was worse than I had imagined. Margaret had been taking out loans in Robert's name, siphoning funds into hidden accounts, and covering her tracks just enough that Robert never noticed. But I did, and I kept every receipt, every document, every shred of proof that would bring everything to light. And then there was Emily. She had always been a master of manipulation, the kind of person who twisted situations to make herself appear as the victim. Always deserving of sympathy, but I had learned something that would turn everything upside down. Emily was having an affair, one that she thought was carefully hidden. But I had discovered it by accident. It started with a message from her to Michael, her fiancé, saying that she had been with someone else. At first, I thought it was a joke. But then I saw the hotel receipts. She hadn't even bothered to hide it properly. She was careless, and I was ready to expose her. By the time the wedding rolled around, I had everything in place. The last piece of the puzzle was ensuring that Michael's mother, Eleanor, knew the truth. I sat with her over coffee a week before the wedding, slid a neatly organized file across the table, and watched her face go from polite curiosity to cold fury. When she saw what I had uncovered, I knew it was over for them. Eleanor was someone who valued integrity above all else. And once she saw the proof, she knew exactly what needed to be done. And so, as I stood there in the ballroom, holding my name tag, I didn't feel humiliated. I felt calm, even serene. I had already won. What they didn't know was that the night was just beginning. And they had no idea what was coming next. The night seemed to stretch on forever. The soft clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversations swirling around me as though they were all in another world. A world where I no longer belonged. Every time I looked around, I saw them, my tormentors, Margaret, with her cool and calculated air, sipping her wine like nothing was amiss. And Emily, smugly basking in the attention, not caring that her actions had started a ripple that would soon consume them all. But I wasn't focused on them. No, I was focused on the carefully laid plan that was about to unfold. They thought they had reduced me to nothing more than a silent figure in the background. An invisible servant at the edges of their perfect little world. They had no idea that while they laughed and whispered among themselves, I was gathering strength in silence, preparing for the final act. Emily caught my gaze at one point and smirked. She couldn't help herself, her eyes dancing with a mix of superiority and a slight hint of pity. As if she believed I was simply too ashamed to fight back. She was wrong. She had no idea who she was dealing with. For years, I had let her push me to the edges. Had let her manipulate situations to make herself appear as the victim. The innocent one in every family drama. But tonight, everything was different. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one in control. I glanced over at Robert, my husband, still talking with Michael. He hadn't looked in my direction once since the humiliation began. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the realization that, deep down, I had expected this. I had hoped he would stand up for me. That he would notice the injustice happening before him. But he didn't. He never did. Over the years, every time Margaret or Emily had undermined me, every time they had belittled me, Robert had simply turned a blind eye. As if it didn't matter. That was the painful truth I had been trying to deny for so long. It wasn't just that they didn't accept me, it was that he didn't either. I had always been the outsider in my marriage. The one who was tolerated, but never truly embraced. And while it hurt, I had come to terms with it. Tonight, I was done waiting for him to notice. Done hoping for his approval. The first step in my plan had already been set into motion when I met with Michael's mother. Eleanor. She had always struck me as someone who could see through the polished facade of the Harris family. Someone who wouldn't be swayed by the wealth or status they clung to so desperately. As she sat across from me that day, flipping through the file I had given her, I had seen the shock on her face, followed by a deep, simmering anger. It was clear that she understood just how much had been hidden. How much manipulation had been at play. What Margaret and Emily didn't know was that Eleanor had always been watching. She saw everything, the little cracks in their perfect world, The way they had used Michael's trust and Robert's loyalty to get what they wanted. And now, Eleanor was on my side. She was going to help me bring everything into the light. I couldn't help but smile as I stood there, watching them all laugh and talk. They thought they had won. Thought they had humiliated me and stripped me of any power. But they were wrong. I was just getting started. The whispers around me grew louder as the evening went on. Their words a reminder of the growing tension that was about to spill over. I could feel it in the air, the anticipation of something big about to happen. What they didn't know was that they were already falling apart. Each passing moment was another step toward their downfall. And they had no idea how close they were to the edge. And so, I waited, sipping my champagne, watching the spectacle unfold, knowing that by the time this night was over, it wouldn't be me walking away in disgrace. It would be them. I could feel the atmosphere shift around me. The subtle change in energy that signaled the inevitable. The whispers grew louder, the glances exchanged between guests more furtive. And I knew the moment had arrived. Mark, oblivious as always, was still deep in conversation. His back turned to me. His attention consumed by Michael and the other guests. They had no idea what was unfolding. It didn't matter now. The pieces were in motion. And the stage had been set. Emily's smugness, her arrogant confidence, was the first to crack. She had been basking in her moment of triumph, watching me squirm, enjoying every second of my discomfort. But she didn't know the full story. She didn't know what was coming. I could see the tension in her shoulders. The way she couldn't quite meet my gaze anymore. It was as though something was beginning to gnaw at her. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, the situation wasn't quite as secure as she had believed. I reached for my champagne flute, taking a slow sip, savoring the taste of victory that lingered on my tongue. It wasn't just the drink, though, it was the realization that everything I had quietly prepared for was now unfolding. I had spent months gathering evidence, setting things in motion, and now it was all coming together. My hand tightened around the glass, and I could see the realization start to dawn in Emily's eyes. She was beginning to feel the ground shift beneath her feet. The first crack came when Michael, standing across the room, received a discreet whisper from a waiter. His face, which had been animated moments before, slowly shifted into a blank expression, his eyes narrowing as the information was passed along. The ballroom had gone quiet, as if everyone felt the tension in the air. The whispered conversation had ceased, replaced by a growing sense of anticipation. I knew what was coming. Michael's gaze snapped to Emily, a coldness in his eyes that had not been there before. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped envelope. I could feel my heart beat faster. The quiet joy I had been holding in check now beginning to spill over. Emily, oblivious to the contents of that envelope, stood frozen as Michael began to open it. And that was when the truth began to spill out, literally. The first photograph was simple, Emily's affair, captured in an intimate moment with another man. The room seemed to hold its breath as Michael flipped through the stack of pictures. The hotel receipts, the messages, the damning evidence of betrayal. Emily's face, once full of confidence, now twisted with panic. She reached forward to speak, but Michael lifted his hand, silencing her before she could utter a word. Her carefully crafted world was crumbling, and she knew it, but the unraveling didn't stop there. The next blow came from Eleanor, who had been watching the scene unfold with an icy calm. She stood, her presence commanding the attention of the room as she made her way to the front. I could feel Margaret's eyes on her, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. Margaret had thought she was untouchable, that her secrets were safe. But she was wrong. Eleanor's voice rang out clear and cold, cutting through the tension in the air. It seems, she began, holding up the envelope that had just been in Michael's hand, that my son's fiancé has been lying to him and to all of us. The words hung in the air, every syllable echoing in the silence. Margaret's face drained of color, her expression a mix of disbelief and fury. She had no idea how deep the deception went. How many people had seen through the veil she had carefully woven over the years. The final crack came in the form of a hotel manager who approached Margaret with the kind of calm professionalism that sent a chill through the room. He leaned in, whispering something in her ear. I couldn't hear the exact words. But I didn't need to. I could see it in Margaret's face, the shift from confident control to mounting panic. She had overplayed her hand, stretched herself too thin in her desperate need to maintain appearances. She had drained Robert's accounts, covering up debts with the belief that she could fix things later. But now, the truth was coming out. The weight of her actions, the lies she had told, was too much for her to carry. I stood there, watching it all unfold, feeling a sense of satisfaction unlike anything I had ever known. They had spent years making me feel like nothing, like an outsider. Tonight, they were finally paying the price for their cruelty. And as the whispers turned into open conversation, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart completely. I had waited for this moment for so long. And now it was here. Margaret's carefully constructed world was crumbling. Emily's lies had been exposed. And Robert, poor Robert, was about to realize just how much he had ignored. Just how much he had allowed to happen while he was too blind to see the truth. I raised my glass, a silent toast to the downfall of everything they had built. For the first time in years, I felt free. The final act had played out. And I had won. As the last of their carefully built facades crumbled, I stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching everything unravel. Emily's smirk had disappeared completely. Her face drained of color as Michael, his expression unreadable, turned away from her, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. Margaret was no better. Her once confident posture now slouched under the weight of the exposure. Her world coming undone in front of an audience of guests who could no longer ignore the truth. Robert, still unaware of the chaos unfolding, stood frozen as he processed the pieces of the puzzle that had just been revealed. I had long since stopped hoping for his understanding. For years, I had fought for his attention, for his empathy, but he had been blind to the suffering of others as long as his own world seemed intact. Now, as he slowly pieced together the scandal, the truth, and the consequences of his inaction, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. But I wasn't there for the mess or the aftermath. I wasn't there to watch their despair consume them. I had done what I came to do. I had protected myself, dismantled the lies, and ensured that I would never again be the pawn in someone else's game. I turned away from the scene, my steps steady, my heart calm. For the first time, I felt liberated, free from the chains of judgment, free from the manipulation and cruelty I had endured. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, a sense of peace washed over me. It was done. I had reclaimed my dignity. And they had lost everything. And now, life would go on, without them holding any power over me. Don't forget to subscribe for more life stories.